Hello and welcome to the Gaggle What We Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, and we are once again very fortunate to welcome back a frequent guest of the Gaggle, frequent participant in RT's Crosstalk, Patrick Henningsen, whose insights are always very popular with Gagglers. And Patrick, I mean, there's obviously a great deal to talk about, but I thought that we could kick off with this apparent melodrama of President Biden withholding or threatening to withhold offensive weapons to Israel, but only if he invades Gaza, which is already not invades Gaza, invades Rafah, which, but of course he's already done that. But if he does it in a way in which it might be a threat to civilians, but he's definitely going to hold off on those offensive weapons, even though, as everybody knows, Israel has so many offensive weapons that it doesn't really even need any additional offensive arms. But nonetheless, Biden has drawn a line in the sand, and he's getting a lot of media coverage. And of course, the Republicans, like the wild dogs, screaming that Biden is betraying Israel and stabbing our greatest ally in the world in the back. So, Patrick, what do you make of all this?
Well, it's kind of come down to a semantic game, which some presidents play very well. Bill Clinton's a good example. Let's not get into his Oval Office escapades, but how do you define an invasion into Rafah? Then it becomes not just an invasion, a major invasion. So not a minor invasion, but a major invasion. And then that's our red line. It's impossible to define. And I think there's a bit of panic that is setting in Washington, especially with the White House. And it's interesting, we've had this conversation trying to work out, because when this story was leaked by Axios about Biden withholding weapons and armaments and munition, things like this to Israel, it was strange because there were no sort of hard confirmations of why are they drifting it out like this. I mean, normally you come off, the president would have to make a definitive statement on this, go right to the podium. It should be on national TV, and it's a very clear policy decision. So they're kind of snaking this one through, and the question is why. And I had an interesting conversation with somebody you guys are familiar with, Larry Johnson, former CIA operative. And he said that it's not a case that they don't want to send them. It's a case that they don't have them. But so between Ukraine and Israel, then the question is, and this is the political question I'll put to George and you, Peter, as well, is it more embarrassing for the United States as a global hegemon to run out of ammunition for its supposed allies and proxies, or is it worse to basically give Israel the cold shoulder while it's in full bore trying to commit genocide against the Palestinian people? I mean, not standing with Israel enough or not having the weapons, which is worse? That's the question I'm going to pose that one basically.
Yeah,
Go ahead, George.
I don't know. I mean, I have my doubts, to be honest, that the United States really has run out of ammunition. I mean, Larry may know something that I don't, but I'd be doubtful that it's really run out. I mean, America is a big producer of armaments. It's the biggest producer of armaments in the world. It's the biggest exporter of armaments in the world. This isn't particularly sophisticated technology that we're talking about. This is just artillery shells. So I'd be surprised that the United States doesn't have it. I think it's more show on the part of Biden, and that somehow he's standing up to Bibi, trying to keep on board his left, trying to keep on board, obviously, the Muslim Americans, Arab Americans. He's got a tough election fight on his hands, particularly in Michigan, which is a key state. So that's how I read it. It's more theater because he's really not denying Israel anything. But anyway, Peter, what do you think?
Well, I think it's theater, but I think both can be true at the same time. Okay, both can be easily true at the same time. A lot of armaments of that nature have been sent to Ukraine, and they're begging for more and more. We all know that story, and maybe we'll even discuss it here. I think this is more an inside job. I think Biden is saying, you got to cut me some slack. I'm going to blow some, send some shade your way, but don't worry about it. And we know you're not going to change your behavior anyway. So I think it's just a lot of smoke and mirrors. I don't take it very seriously at all. But what it does tell us, though, is that the Biden campaign is feeling the heat. Okay. And it's a no-win situation now for Biden. And George and I have talked about this exhaustively, is that, so the Republicans going to say that Biden has betrayed the Israelis. I mean, this gets into Lulu land. Okay. But while both parties are in lockstep in support of Israel. So you want to play this inside baseball with me now? I don't take it very seriously. What I do take seriously, obviously, is the genocide. But these kind of maneuvers in the dark don't really change the reality on the ground. It's more fodder for Sunday talk shows and for people in both political parties to make hay of it. So it's interesting, but doesn't make any kind of difference. And I think if the Biden administration and campaign thinks that somehow they can appeal to people that are steadfast against genocide, I think they have to have their heads examined. We're all way beyond that point right now.
So if this is damage control during an election year, then that means that what's happened in the last couple of weeks is this wave of student protests across campuses in America, in Europe as well, but mainly in the United States. This is completely being downplayed by the US media as being a fringe, radical phenomenon, illegitimate, and the police are going to clean it up and restore order again. That's not true then.
I mean, but just the rhetoric itself tells me one thing, is that the elites are terrified of what's going on. That's why we have this reaction. This is panic, real panic. And it's bipartisan real panic. That's what makes it even more.
The Democrats always go for, the young generation aggressively. Even Biden was playing that grandpa figure in 2020 during the campaign. So they really are scared that they've lost Gen Z on this issue. I really feel like this is spreading rapidly, and the more they try to put it down, the more these groups are like proliferating around
Patrick,
campuses.
don't you think? My sense is this: what's going on in Gaza, Israel's genocidal onslaught. I think that's a tipping point, because I think both parties have. Actually, it's really interesting if you look from 18 to 34. More people there's a more a curiosity with the GOP. I wouldn't say that they're moving there, but they're saying we've given up on the Democratic Party, and then this happens. I think that is created a cascade effect. Okay, and I don't think with that demographic, I think it's going to be very hard for them to recover. What they're going to get all their loans forgiven? Okay, they're all going to get great jobs. The environment problem is going to be resolved. All of their issues. So for me, it's just kind of a tipping point, and I think that.
But I think also what's significant is that. Biden has made a big pitch for this 18 to 34-year-old age group. I mean, this forgiveness of student loans, which although the Supreme Court has already ruled on that, but he still get all the way around it. We're gonna get around it. This is an explicit pitch, but he's doing poorly. He only has an 8-point lead. Among that group, where he had something like a 24-point lead in 2020. It's a huge collapse. And no, it's not because the young somehow favor Trump. It's just that they don't like him. And this is really contributing badly to him.
And on top of it, it's really easy to dislike this president. He's made it very easy for people to dislike him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing is with young people, they've been fed all of these pseudo issues over the years. They're coming out for climate change year after year. Of course, none of the protests are going to change the weather. So I think there's that despondency set in on some of these issues. They know that the country and the world is not going to accept trans as a mainstream, or gender fluidity as a sort of mainstream concept. It's already being kind of compartmentalized into a sort of corner again, not trending popular anymore. Here's an issue that they can actually impact.
Yep.
This is a very clear moral issue. Put pressure on the government, put pressure on their institutions that are directly connected to this issue. So, I mean, a legitimate
It's not
issue,
complicated. It's
a
not
real one.
complicated.
And so they're gravitating towards it, and they can see they have common cause with other students, other people, all races, all around the world. This is one of those historical moments, and the students have risen to the moment of this generation. And I personally am really encouraged to see it, because you couldn't get an anti-war group together for love nor money for years. I mean, to get them out and march it's impossible on this issue. A little country, a little area like Palestine has suddenly triggered this widespread, broad-based anti-war movement. I mean, I never could have imagined it would
Well,
ever
Patrick,
happen.
I mean, just think back. I mean, there's something George and I have reflected upon. I mean, the Israel-Palestine conflict, I know you know well, George knows well, I know well. And I remember on Crosstalk, I just stopped doing it. I mean, because I just couldn't get any kind of first of all, I would get guests that would just lie through their teeth, so it was just exhausting. Okay, and then it's just it's a problem in time memorial. You know, they've always it's unsolvable. All these AIPAC talking points, and it gets so exhausting. And then think about what you see on YouTube and Rumble. Think about before October 7th and since. I mean, there's an enormous amount of education going on right now, okay? And people that we thought had been long forgotten, Norman Finkelstein, suddenly comes back in very much in demand. So that's heartening for me, is the amount of education and people using the word illegal occupation, saying apartheid. Even though normatively I think that those were apt descriptions, but they were very marginalized terminology before October 7th. Now it's prevalent.
Yeah, and also the level of political awareness on the campuses. You look at the information that they have on their boards and their flyers and whatnot. Very good, in-depth, contextual understanding of the situation in the Middle East and Palestine in particular. So, I mean, those are like 19, 18, 20, 21-year-olds, actually more au fait on the subject than a lot of their older counterparts.
For
So,
sure.
I mean, this is, I mean, I think, it's interesting. There was a poll that was done recently. I think the Intercept reported on it. And it looked at people, whether they favored Israel or they favored Palestine. And there was a very clear correlation, more than a correlation. It was definitive. If you watched cable news, you majority veered towards Israel. If you got your news outside of mainstream media, you favored and more sympathetic towards Palestine. So, I mean, we all knew this, right, guys? But there's the actual definitive metric there on that issue. So that goes a long way to explain, I think, how you got this big chasm that's now forming between generations on issues like this.
Yeah, and I think so. And I think that if one goes back to, I mean, the one that seems most parallel was the 1982 invasion of Lebanon, but that didn't go on for that long. I mean, this has already been going on now for 7 months. But it started in June 1982. Sabra and Shatila was September, and so it was much more compressed, and it wasn't an election year. So this has gone on and on and on, and seems
well, George, there was no
result
internet
anytime soon, and it's an election year.
There was no internet then.
There was no internet, but it did cause a lot of aggravation, and because what Israel was doing, I mean, bombing a city, I mean, Beirut, I mean, it's a major city, they're bombing it, and then of course Sabra and Shatila was so horrific because it was just women and children getting massacred. But at the same time, the Reagan administration kept its distance much more from Israel than Biden has done. Biden has gone all in.
True.
You didn't have Reagan embracing Menachem Begin to the contrary. So it's very different from the situation in '82.
Well, the other thing is Republicans traditionally, at least in the near history, have pushed back against Israel, pushed back against their influence, against the lobby. George Bush Sr.,
Absolutely.
great example there. George Bush Jr. as well. You look at the sort of dismantling of the settlements and so forth when Ariel Sharon, after he marched on the Temple Mount and all that. And then Donald Trump sort of reversed that trend. But now it's pretty clear, just looking at the voting on the appropriation of money for Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, etc. It's a complete whip line vote on the Democrat side. But you do have a dozen dissenters on the Republican side. So the Democrats have become more slavishly adherent to the wishes of the lobby on this, not just the Israeli lobby, the Ukrainian lobby as well. And so there is dissent on the Republican side, but then you have the real zealots on the Republican side as well, the Tom Cottons of the world, and Mike Johnson, who, literally invokes biblical messianic end times eschatological prophecy while he's speaking to the press. And then what happened to our separation of church and state there? I don't know. This is incredible. And by the way, that's a Mike Johnson that was just rescued by
Again.
Hakeem Jeffries and the Democrats. So there's the uniparty. Yeah, what do you do?
And we have the uniparty now invoking the Holocaust. I mean, it's a kind of an amazing thing, which is they're absolutely united on this method. How do we just change the subject? How to avoid talking about Gaza, anything that's going on in Gaza? Let's talk about the Holocaust. Let's talk about something that happened 80 years ago and just keep repeating it. And we had a good example of this the other day at this Holocaust Remembrance Day, where Mike Johnson and Biden both spoke nonstop about the Holocaust and made no mention at all about what's going on in Gaza. And again, that's a little different from the way it was in Lebanon. In Lebanon in 82, there was still a discussion about what Israel is actually doing in Lebanon, not what was going on in Europe in the 1940s.
Well, what made Mike Johnson's speech at the same event that George just mentioned, he went through, actually, I just saw it a few minutes ago. It was very melodramatic in a very cheap way, but a brother losing the grip of her sister's hand, and arrests, and doctors committing heinous experiments, and the arrests, and all of that's going on in Gaza right now. Okay, I mean, that's what shocked me, is that they can turn the Holocaust into a cartoon. Shame on them, okay, for political purposes today. But I mean, all of the melodramatic language that Johnson, the screwball from Louisiana, invoked is exactly a reflection of what is happening on the ground now. And we all were told never again. Well, never again means never again to anyone. Okay. So a lot of, I don't know if you saw, there was a young man, it was local television, very importantly, not the networks, one of the most articulate, he's standing there, he's locked in arms, and he's turning his head with the mic, someone's interviewing him, and he just very calmly explained exactly why they're there, what they want, and what they're going to do, which completely, again, is the flip side of what they, these blue-hairs, and they don't know what they want to do, and they don't understand the conflict and all. It was really very interesting. Looking at some of the local coverage is very interesting, as opposed to the narrative that the uniparty is trying to push out, which fewer and fewer people are believing, as you've just pointed out.
So Patrick, what do you how do you see, the immediate future? What do you think is going to happen? But I mean, both in Gaza and in the United States, right? What do you think?
I think I'm a little bit disheartened, because what I see, and what many others have pointed out to great pains to anybody who has a lick of morality or humanity left in them, is that this is a systematic ethnic cleansing program. And it's no coincidence that the day that the U.S. Floating port goes operational, right at the sort of, dividing line of northern and southern Gaza parallel, Israel takes over the Rafah border crossing. So there's an agenda here, and without sounding too, hyperbolic. The agenda on the Israeli side is clearly depopulation of Gaza. So they're looking to drive out. How else can you explain it? You send 500, 600,000 people to a so-called safe zone, and then you start bombing that safe zone. Then you invade that safe zone in order to push them into the Sinai Desert and put pressure on Egypt. And if they're not going out that way, they'll be going out on a U.S. built pier in Gaza. And I kind of saw this with the World Food Kitchen, Farago. And what that was engineered by the U.S. State Department and USAID to reverse the PR hemorrhaging that was going on, with Washington being totally complicit. This is after months of students saying Genocide Joe. They knew they had a problem in Washington, a serious problem. So they need to reverse it. So they changed it to a humanitarian mission. And the U.S. poses as the humanitarian saviors, even though they're the ones supplying all the bombs and ammunition and all the drone support, surveillance, targeting information, and everything, to pose as the humanitarians. How craven and how sinister that is. And the World Food Kitchen, for whatever reason, that thing blew up after these aid workers were killed. But that's what I think that's ultimately that's what that pier is for. It's for the U.S. to bring the military in to evacuate Palestinians.
Well, also, Patrick, I agree with you, and that's the obvious reason to build this port. I mean, if they wanted to get aid in, they would open up the checkpoints. So that's a simpleton can understand that. But I think there's an extra layer here, is that when you put American troops, even if it's on a pier connected to the land, they're targets, and they'll be targets for the IDF, okay, not necessarily for Hamas or other groups there. And I think that that could be a catalyst for something, okay? I mean, if you look at so let's reflect about what Biden said and what Johnson said at the Holocaust Remembrance Day. I mean, one soldier takes a bullet, the Holocaust is back, okay? I mean, and they've been preparing. At least in the official narrative, they're preparing everybody for this here. So I think that this pier has nothing to do with aid. I think it's setting up a potential false flag for the U.S. to get involved, and then I don't know. I just read the headlines from antiwar.com. They want to put student protesters on a no-fly list. Okay, one screwball in Congress wants to send students that are arrested for being pro-Hamas, whatever that's supposed to mean, to send them to Gaza. Okay, these are our officialdom right now. This is our officialdom saying these things here. They're looking. See, I think that they want to. Reacting to the way they are to the students, they want to do a blanket now. Get rid of TikTok. Okay, Facebook is in line, Google's in line, and they want and YouTube is going to start getting in line. Okay, I think that's a perfect catalyst for more censorship here.
And by the way, Elon Musk tweeted out a poll a couple of days ago, said if students put a foreign flag up the flagpole, should they be deported to that country of the flag they've put up the pole? He's referring to the Palestinian flag. And of course, this gets hundreds of thousands or millions of votes, as anything Elon tweets does. I sort of criticized him, challenged him on that.
Yeah. But that's an argument that should be used against Americans who serve in the Israeli armed forces. I mean, once you serve in the armed forces, you should then be deported to the country in whose armed services.
Well, how about congressmen, Congress in the House of Representatives waving Ukrainian flags? Maybe they should be sent to Ukraine. All right.
Yeah, so
going back to your point, Patrick, I mean, the evacuation. Where would they be evacuated to? What would be the ultimate destination of the evacuees?
That's a good question.
Patrick, let's just say yes, deport them to Palestine, make it a state, okay, and then they can be.
Right.
I mean, sending them to the state.
My reply to Elon, was, now you're going into fascist territory, because that's what fascists do. They sort of deport people for having dissenting opinions, or worse, they throw them in jail. But this rhetoric is becoming more commonplace. It's like, let's take them out of school. Let's de-enroll them. Let's make sure Alan Dershowitz, let's make sure they're unemployable for the rest of their career. He's saying these things publicly. Elon Musk and all these people are kind of piling in on these students. Do these people realize what they're saying? I don't think they do, because they think they're on the side of power. They think they're on the side of the majority, or they think because Fox News is behind them and some other people in the Israeli lobby, and that somehow they have a mainstream position. I don't think they do. I don't think this is a very un-American thing to say.
But you can, well, I mean, I mean, we know Dershowitz has the power to ensure that people don't get employed. I mean, if, you know, particularly when you get law school students, and, you know, and it'd be quite easy to get the top law firms to say, hey, we're not hiring anyone. You know, hey, this person, he's on YouTube. We've got this video, boom, he's not hired. So, you know, you went to law school, spent all that money on your tuition fees, and that's it. You know, you're not going to get into any of the big law firms. But could you just, you know, go back to the issue of the evacuees? What's your take on that? Where do you think they would be taken to?
Cyprus, maybe to a military facility. If they're being evacuated by U.S. military, they'd probably be taken to a U.S. military facility, British or something neutral, maybe an island in Greece, or who knows, a way station in Europe. Before the Americans, the way the American right are packaging this is, we need to rescue the Christians from Palestine first. They always do this with Iraq, with ISIS. Glenn Beck, need to send in, you know, superheroes, ex-special forces guys to rescue the Christians and bring them to America, because they don't want to live in their home country where their ancestors are from. We need to save them and bring them to
the original Christians,
to live the American dream, you know, right? Through the Mercury Project or something like this.
But how many can you do? I mean, you're talking about hundreds of thousands. I mean, that's an awful lot.
I don't think you can do that many, but I think you can do enough to create a sort of spectacle, a public relations spectacle. So some of them would be destined for the United States. There would have to be. There are a lot of Palestinians in the United States in various enclaves and communities, in Michigan and Kansas City and different places around the country, in Los Angeles. But is that what the Palestinians want, or is this what they'll take if life becomes so unbearable in Gaza?
How can we tell under what metric could possibly be generated? Is this voluntary? I mean, are they going to say this is voluntary?
They will say that. They will say that.
This is ethnic cleansing. It's against international humanitarian law.
So, Peter, to cover that up, to pave that over, you need to create a big show. Yeah. And so it has to be a big show. And the chutzpah has to be like 12 out of 10.
Yeah, but Patrick, this has to be a big show. Killing one soldier on that pier is a big enough show. Can you imagine the juice that would be behind that story? That, you know, the United States is at war with Hamas. Okay. And if you don't get on the boat, then you're considered part of Hamas. Men, women, and children and elderly, doesn't matter. You remember after 9/11, the horrific things people were saying? I could imagine people say, yep, well, that's the way it is.
Well, no, if they blame it on Iran or Hezbollah, then by extension, Iran, the U.S. will use that to trigger the National Defense Authorization Act, or emergency use of force. And they've done that before. After the San Bernardino mass shooting, that was the trigger for ISIS legally from the executive branch. Okay, so the U.S. deployed in Iraq on the basis of the legal basis was the San Bernardino mass shooting that was allegedly ISIS inspired on Facebook in December 2015. So it doesn't take much for the U.S. to create a legal justification for deployment or an authorization of force or anything like this.
I'm not legal authorizations. I mean, they're about as thin as cigarette paper. Okay, I mean, I'm sure they'll do it, but
with Iran,
I disagree with you on that. I don't think they want to pick a fight with Iran right now. No.
There's also a problem.
Israel probably wants
evacuation, which is that this is an election year, and nothing is more of an election loser than you start bringing in thousands upon thousands of people into the United States who will immediately be accused of secret Hamas supporters.
That's right.
You're bringing in jihadis, you're bringing in
that's right.
mullahs and whatever. it's just not, it isn't feasible, after the election, maybe, but before the election, there's just no way that you could start bringing, look at what happened with the Afghanistan. I mean, that was, that was a hugely unpopular for Biden, but that was at the beginning of his administration. In an election year, it's just not doable. You can't start bringing in people.
Patrick, how, in the way you look at it, how ad hoc is the decision making, or do you think that they have a whiteboard with a basic plan and they will manipulate the narrative as they go along as necessary? I mean, if they do have a plan, then maybe I'm giving them more credit, because it seems to me so much of this is just very ad hoc.
So you're asking, are there any adults left in charge in Washington?
There are no adults in Washington. I mean, that's just, that's just a myth. There are adults, the adults in the room. Who are they?
Between Ukraine and the situation in Palestine, I see no adults in charge. I see, as Peter said, just ad hoc upon ad hoc upon ad hoc decision making, patchwork of policy, totally incoherent, totally just self-contradictory at every turn. That's been U.S. foreign, let's face it, though, that's been kind of broadly U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East for like 50 years. It's one move to cover the mistake of the previous move. But this is really, in such a short period of time, we're seeing a total breakdown on, the U.S.'s reputation, their ability for the military to project power, their legitimacy with their allies and their enemies alike. They're attacking their allies. They're threatening them with sanctions. There's a lot of problems with the empire right now.
But suppose, let me just argue it the other way. I mean, somebody could say, well, it hasn't been too bad for the United States, because what would be a really problematic for the U.S. is if it lost some of its key allies, namely Saudi Arabia. But basically, no one has got involved. It's been Hamas has been taking a real pounding from Israel without anyone really getting seriously involved. Neither Hezbollah. I mean, the Houthis have done a little bit, but ultimately everybody has kind of stayed out. So the U.S. This real problem, I think, is not so much in the news, but here at home. I mean, clearly there's just a collapse of the consensus at home, which is, I've never seen that. But in terms of the Middle East, it hasn't been that bad.
What would really be something, okay, is if look at what triggered the Arab Spring in 2011. As on paper, anyway, it's the self-immolation of the market trader in Tunisia, who set himself on fire, and that started a cascade known as the Arab Spring. Of course, we know there's more to it behind the scenes with Egypt and of course Libya and Syria, of course. But think about that. What it took to ignite that level of the Arab Street unrest, and look at what's happened in the last 7 months in Gaza. And there's no Arab Spring. There was immediately in the first couple of weeks when they bombed Al Shifa Hospital, or they bombed that hospital and they tried to blame it on the Palestinians, the first one. That there was a huge Jordan, Lebanon. You started to see the kind of uprising there. That's one thing that the United States and its Gulf state allies wouldn't be able to contend with, or Jordan for that matter. It's another monarchy there. So that would be a game changer. Egypt, for instance. So, but I don't know if that's potentially, if that can happen or not, because people have just become so complacent, kind of accepted the fate that, you don't want to get in a tussle with the United States and Israel militarily. So everybody's playing it, at least from a axis of resistance point of view.
I agree. I mean, a lot of these people are bought and paid anyway. I mean, at least the elites are. What they call the Arab Street, if it's real or not. I think that the people are seething there, and those governments are going to be more afraid of their own people. And that's one of the reasons why they need to keep their powder dry to shoot their own people, and instead of getting and we all agree here. I mean, Saudi Arabia, they got a good gig going, okay, but they have more options now, and they've been showing it. Normalizing relations with Iran, allowing China to be a broker. So things are not hunky dory for the United States in the Middle East.
That's not. They
and also, getting involved means the end. I mean, this would be the end of the monarchy in Saudi Arabia. This would be the end of the Qatari family and all that. That it's very existential. So I understand why they don't want to do it. But I agree. I tend to agree with George here, is that the real problem, because what I just said has been going on for the last 75 years in the Middle East, okay? But what's going on in the United States and the collective West is something very different. And I don't think in our lifetime, this bill that went through the House about equating anti-Semitism with calling just about anything you don't like anti-Semitism is just horrifying. I mean, it's just like I never thought could never imagine something like that.
Yeah, no, this is the new woke right, you could call it.
Yep, yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yep.
Demanding bigger safe spaces, like not just a safe room on campus, but the whole campus and half of Manhattan has to be a safe space, according to Eric Adams. And then not only that, this bill, Peter, is the Orwellian safe space to control the gray matter between your ears. So, I mean, it's just unbelievable. To me, it's incredible. All these constitutional conservatives, the Mark Levines of the world, these people have traded off the Constitution their whole
George,
career.
for some reason, still watches him. I get
No, I do not. No, I do not.
I'm just ribbing you. I'm just ribbing you.
I like his defense of Trump and the lawfare and everything. It's spot on. But then you can see they're not really that constitutional, because they're willing to throw the First Amendment under the bus with the students that they disagree with.
That's such an interesting observation, is that, you know, particularly if we look at people that I think the three of us would recognize as level-headed conservatives, okay? How they've been able to so easily pivot. And you see it in their presentations. You agree, and then why did you take that turn? It's not consistent with what you've said during your career and all of your books, and you just see this. It's jarring for me. It's like, wow, how are you going there?
Yeah, I mean, and this goes far beyond, little Ben Shapiro, because Ben Shapiro's always been known, he's an Israel firster. But you got these people like Steve Bannon, who have marketed themselves as America First Conservative, MAGA. Basically, I'm only really interested in what's good for America. I'm not going to get involved in all kinds of stupid wars. And there he is, essentially embracing the most extreme elements in Israel. That's it. He's identifying himself completely with Likudniks, and is anxious as to why is Israel listening to Biden. No, Israel has to ignore Biden. It has to go into Gaza and finish the job off. And that's, I think, just an outrage. And you think this was a con job. MAGA was a con job. People were fooled into support. Oh, yeah, that's good. We're going to get rid of all that stupid foreign policy that we've been pursuing for the last 30 years. We're going to do America first. And then it turns out it's the same thing, same old thing.
And add on to it, the vigilantes in Los Angeles that attacked UCLA. I mean, a deep moneyed spouse was behind that. And, that's vigilante justice. I mean, and from what I could see, the firing of sending in fireworks into tents, that's life threatening. That's real. Okay. And they demur. Okay. It's really amazing.
No, it's incredible. So you can see that kind of neoconservative impulse, that primordial neoconservative impulse, clinging to we need to get rid of the Muslims again. We're back to 9/11 very, very quickly, because it's an easy thing to fall back into it, because the framework is already laid in the United States for that politically. In much the same way, I will say that the framework for anti-Russian sentiment was kind of laid during the Cold War, anti-Soviet, anti-communism.
Seamless.
The groove is there, and all you have to do is pour the updated narrative into the groove, and you have basically the whole thing activated again. So, but I have my crypto theory on this is that a lot of these so-called conservatives and neoconservatives especially, or even the neoliberals cross-dressing as conservatives, that they're really sort of, from the Chicago school, from the Wolfowitzes and the Pearls and the Boltons of the world, these are just basically radical Trotskyites who couldn't make it on the left. as students, and it was pretty much an open field on the right. I mean, let's face it, you can walk in to a conservative meeting and take over pretty quickly because conservatives sit back and they're pretty chilled.
Right.
And as you have all these jumped up Trotskyites cross-dressing as, conservatives, and this is how we got the neoconservative movement.
And this is the world we
Prove me
have because
wrong.
we have.
This
we
is,
have
and you're absolutely right,
Go ahead,
Patrick, because it goes back, 1972. Who was the main opposition to Nixon's détente policy? Scoop Jackson. And Scoop Jackson, all the people who were there, who were working for Scoop Jackson, Elliot Abrams, Richard Pearl, Paul Wolfowitz, and as you say, these are these former Trotskyists. And Nixon, I think, as you were saying, alluding earlier, Patrick, he was that traditional conservative. Not a great enthusiast for Israel, not a great enthusiast generally for getting involved in stupid wars, and was pursuing a sensible policy on détente, arms control, and so on. The most powerful attack came from the Scoop Jackson wing of the party, and which eventually prevailed.
Yes, and one of the many other reasons why they got rid of Nixon.
Yeah.
It became the Henry Jackson Society, which is the cauldron of most bad things in U.S. foreign policy in recent years. I mean, the Atlantic Council, the Henry Jackson Society, CNN, all the, these think tanks, that's the revolving door in the Beltway. So, George, you have just proven my theory. You've given it academic grounding. For my crypto Trotskyite theory of the conservative wing. Wow.
Can we now transition to Ukraine? Or you want to say anything else, Peter?
No, let's go ahead. Go ahead.
You recently you posted a lengthy interview with I think Anatoly's first name, Anatoly Derkach.
Andrei
Derkach. And there was a lot of interesting material there, and could you maybe sum up what Derkach told you in your interview?
Yeah, he's a former Ukrainian parliamentarian, very experienced in Ukrainian politics, has seen the changing of the guard from 1991 onwards. He's also an investigator, and he kind of gained a lot of notoriety for tracking corruption and financial fraud. So there's plenty of that going on at the moment. So this was, I had an opportunity to do an interview with him, so I took the opportunity. And it was very interesting because what he did, I think, was confirm a lot of suspicions. I mean, the conversation began on the back of the Crocus City Hall attack in Moscow, and then the special investigative committee that the Russian Federation had formed. He's involved in that, as others are as well. And what he was able to bring to the table on the Ukrainian side was this network, this slush fund that's been formed. You just imagine the amount of cash that is pouring into Ukraine from all these different crevices. Even USAID, there's a fake grant scandal where they do all these democratic reform programs that never happened, but the money was allocated and disappeared in all these different places. So some of the money from Burisma that was channeled through Burisma from other scandals, like the reverse gas scandal, is that's a multi-billion-dollar graft operation that went on for years, stealing Russian gas and piping it back into Ukraine in the so-called reverse gas scandal, and then charging a premium on top of it. Plus, you have the state sovereign debt, junk bond, state bond loan, that scandal where they're laundering money back in to the country that was stolen from the state budget, and then people can invest in Ukrainian state. There's all of these sources of finance, and Zlochevsky, and CEO of Burisma, was involved, the bribery scandal. So you can see that funding terrorist actions and black ops, there's plenty of money for this. And so he's tracked it and believes right down to the actual department and the actual U.S.-backed operation in Ukraine, in the Ministry of Defense Intelligence and so forth under Budanov and so forth, that you can actually track equipment, material support for terrorist activities. So, I mean, there's enough there, I think, to open an international tribunal. And that's one of the main points that he's making. But he's been kicked out of the country. He's basically in exile, as are anybody else that basically exposed Biden corruption, including Konstantin Kulik, other people, former prosecutors.
Does he have
So-
any evidence that Ukraine was involved in the Crocus City Hall attack?
I think the Russian Federation, their investigation has shown that definitely these actors have transited through Ukraine and received clearly some material support from Ukraine in terms of tracking the exact funds and then pinning the case. I think that's still an effort that's underway at the moment, but I think it's pretty clear that this is kind of like a, in my mind, I compare it to Operation Gladio, where you had this strategy of tension throughout Europe, and it was designed to elicit certain reactions, either from the Eastern Bloc or even within the Western, to influence politics within Western Europe. So this is similar, and it was all funded through cells within cells, and using money and working with gangs, cartels, organized crime. And that's how Western intelligence has operated for years. The BCCI is a good example. And then you have there's a Baltic bank that quite possibly performed the same, Latvia, I believe, that performed the same function with, the same type of people. Look who's on the board of Burisma, Kofor Black, former CIA Black Ops officer, Hunter Biden, and so forth. A lot of people don't pay attention to the CIA operatives. It's all about Hunter Biden. But, the United States had a pretty good clandestine network in place in Ukraine. And the idea clearly is to use it and develop it as a cudgel to poke Russia and to remilitarize Europe. And that's exactly what's happened over the last couple of years. Durkash and others are just basically highlighting how the mechanisms work to make all this stuff happen. The other thing he said that was very interesting was there was also some of this money was diverted for the Nord Stream pipeline attacks. Now, and I was trying to work out what he meant when I first heard him say that in a previous interview with the Italian-American journalist Simone Mangianti, who's George Papadopoulos' wife. She interviewed him back on camera in January, and he mentioned this Nord Stream terrorist slush fund, and I was like trying to work this out. So we got more details on this, and Ukraine and the United States have worked to create this kind of red herring operation to even train Ukrainian divers and then place them near the Nord Stream site to create a distraction, as he calls it. He's calling it a false flag, but it's a reverse false flag because they're using U.S. is using their ally Ukraine to create a red herring, and it's very well financed. Millions and millions of dollars were spent putting this together. So this Nord Stream operation, if we go by what he's saying and the evidence, this is a very sophisticated, massive operation that was not undertaken frivolously by the United States and their allies.
So the red herring, in the sense that it was in order to provide a cover story subsequently. Oh, look, there was all these Ukrainians,
to
training
pin it
and so
on Ukraine.
Exactly, but in the meantime, the real culprits were, of course, the Americans.
The awkward moment was when they came up with this, Andromeda yacht story in Poland. And supposedly Ukrainians, sorry, I triggered the Zoom balloons. When this happened, there was no pushback from Kiev. The U.S. threw them under the bus. NATO threw them under the bus, and they just stayed nice and quiet like good boys and girls. That was a very awkward moment, because Zelensky didn't say, "How dare they?" None of that. So that to me was a weak point, I think, in that narrative. And so it's
except that they said it was just freelance Ukrainians. They said Zelensky wasn't involved. He had nothing.
A rogue cell.
Exactly, a rogue cell. Yeah.
So,
and then they pinned it on a guy that's already under.
Exactly, a guy was already in prison. Yeah.
And then you have super
blaming
soldier
the dead
divers.
guy.
That's
you have their super soldier diving team as well, and that whole story is related to this.
The only thing, the oddity of all that is that given the level of corruption in Ukraine, and before all of this started in 2014, I was a regular visitor to Ukraine, and the corruption was wide out in the open. I mean, I remember the corruption in Russia in 1998, 1999, very much the same. But my observation is that these clandestine operations are the only good money spent because the rest of it is stolen. That's my impression here.
But the other thing, Peter, is that the U.S. government, the U.S. Embassy in Kiev, Maria Yovanovitch, all these people that played these dramatic roles during the impeachment hearing, these were all thick. They're all thick like thieves. There's all sorts of graft going on, all sorts of scandals. During the Obama administration, they were absolutely rinsing Ukraine. And using it for laundering, embezzlement, as an ATM machine.
I remember that hearing, and poor Masha, as everybody liked to call
Masha,
her.
yeah.
Poor
Masha, with the tears pouring down. I was fired.
Trump is sending out mean tweets against me. Okay, but in light of what you've just said here and other things that we have all learned subsequently, I just have to imagine that poor Masha, when she was in front of that microphone, was in the back of her head was saying, and you're worried about Hunter Biden? You have no idea what we were doing there. You're just focused on this tiny sliver. And I mean, she must have been laughing walking out of the hearing because she's what, at Georgetown or George Washington or something like that?
Yeah, I think so, Georgetown.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Hunter is the ultimate foil.
Yeah,
Hunter
but I mean, can you imagine?
Foil.
That's the price I had to pay. You have no idea what we were up to.
Yeah, well, the tapes came out with Poroshenko and Biden. You notice how nobody can refute those, but those were recorded and they were leaked, according to I think Durkash and others said that was Zelensky and Yermak's office that put those out initially. So think about that. You have Kiev with leverage over Washington. There's a lot of tapes. There's a lot of tapes there. Just that one of getting the loan, Biden threatening to withdraw the loan if they don't fire Viktor Shokin. Just that one alone, that's just total racketeering by Joe Biden, caught on tape with Poroshenko. The Poroshenko story is hilarious because he didn't have to record all these, but he did it kind of for his own personal collection. It was just kind of weird thing he had, and then he left him in the office when he left. I mean, he didn't take him with him or anything. So his personal archive. So he wasn't all there, I think, Petro Poroshenko, but there's a lot of tapes of a lot of conversations.
Well, here's the same guy that keeps trying to escape from Ukraine, and they keep capturing him. Yeah, I have a permission slip. I can leave. Nope, go back. Okay. When all this is said and done, it's going to be amazing. Okay, all of the shenanigans been going, and I'm glad you pointed this out. It's been going on ever since the coup. I mean, they have been in there like gangbusters from day one. I mean, George and I have always, joked, how Hunter Biden was the how would you call it? He approached the new frontier. He was a trailblazer. Yeah, he probably was. But I mean, look at everybody that followed him. Okay, and on every single level. Would there be an audit of any of these things? That will be the real story to be told. Where the money went.
But it's very interesting, Patrick, that you mentioned Operation Gladio, because that topic came up at an early stage. I think I remember reading about it first at 2021, and I was a little puzzled, why are they talking about Operation Gladio? But in a way, it kind of made sense, because the whole point of Operation Gladio was suppose we need to create these networks of resistance in the event of Soviet victory. So we want to have, these resistance. So we put up, so therefore we'll work with gangsters, terrorists, all kinds of fascist groups.
Fascists.
Exactly. We'll give them arms, they'll create these arms and paramilitary forces and everything in the event of a Soviet occupation. But of course, there was no Soviet occupation. So you were just simply feeding some of the worst and scummiest elements. Of course, we saw that in the famous Bologna railway bombing in 1980, where it became clear, this was all basically CIA money that had been involved here. But it's very interesting that they were thinking along those lines very early on in Ukraine. Hey, let's work with the worst, scummiest elements in Ukraine, provide them with lots of funds in the event of a Russian occupation. And you know, there was, as you say, plenty of money to go around.
Yeah, it also, I'll point back to the recent closure of the Baltic International Bank in Latvia. A lot of people will say a lot of these sort of scandals, money going through that country, some of the Baltic states, performing that exact function that the BCCI performed before it was shut down eventually in a massive scandal. The other thing that I will say that's also interesting is, which Durkash talked about in our interview, is he mentioned this idea of this pitting Russians against Ukrainians, or this dividing Ukraine into kind of different ethnic or political identities. This kind of began under Kuchma. So it goes all the way back to the independence of Ukraine, and the West absolutely was promoting this. There were this money for, you know, educational material, all the different international. We fund these books all over the world. Even Afghanistan, they were doing textbooks.
You know, Patrick, it's very interesting is that I remember, George, I was in Budapest when the Soviet Union dissolved. Okay. But when I came back to the United States, I can remember I was at at Berkeley at the Slavic Studies library, which had every single Eastern European come. They had the Bulgarian literature, the Polish literature, of course, Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty stuff was all over the place. And I came back and I talked to the head librarian. I think she was Bulgarian, and she said, "Peter, it's over. They pulled our funding. It's all gone." Now, why am I mentioning this? Because approximately at exactly that time, the Davis Institute at Harvard opened up Ukrainian studies. Tons and tons of money started funneling into that. I remember I was getting ready to leave academia because even at that time it was too woke for me. Can you imagine? That was like 20, 30 years ago. And the money was, they were pouring money. Okay, here's a fellowship to the Davis Institute. You know, it's like $50,000. I can remember when I got my Fulbright, it was like $15,000 for a whole year. And they were throwing the money like 50,000, 75,000. Go to Ukraine. We'll pay you. You know, you learn the language, live there. You know, lavish.
That's very
it's
true.
The equivalent. It's just quickly. It's the equivalent of critical race theory, basically. It's the same kind of weaponized identity politics that we've seen in action in the United States and other places. It's designed to divide, to get people to be suspicious of each other, to ultimately atomize society.
You're right, but Peter, this happened before the dissolution of the Soviet Union. In the 1980s, already Harvard was getting funds into its Ukrainian Research Center to study the Holodomor. You know, that's when this term came into being. And I remember when Robert Conquest, who's done some very good work, but when he wrote his book, the Terror Famine, Ukraine, the Terror Famine, or whatever it was called, that got a lot of money, research from this Ukraine Research Center of Harvard. So they were already putting out this story about the terror famine, that Stalin did this deliberately to crush.
Well, okay, then I can up you, George. Even in the early 50s, they were supporting fascist elements in Ukraine. We're all right. You're perfectly right. No, you're absolutely right now that you say it. But particularly after the end of the Soviet Union, this was something that was really, really pushed hard. And there was an interesting marketing to it, and it was actually directed to people like me, because I basically studied communist Eastern Europe. And so when communist Eastern Europe came to an end, I'm just, up shit creek. There was, what am I supposed to do? That it doesn't exist anymore. Okay. And they were saying, oh, no, there's still an opportunity for you. Ukraine studies. That's the new thing.
That's right. But it's very interesting, Patrick, you said about Kuchma, because Kuchma wrote this book, Ukrainians Are Not Russians.
Yes.
That's his book. And the funny thing is the media, the Western media continued to say, oh, Kuchma was very pro-Russian. You know, oh, Kuchma was kind of Moscow's man. in Kiev. But that's that's his book. Ukrainians
Yeah.
are not Russians, and even so,
Yeah.
he's pro-Russian. Just like they said this about Yanukovych, even though he was explicitly trying to curry favor with Washington and distance himself from Russia. Oh yeah, he was Moscow's man. He was pro-Russian.
That's what that's there's a very famous podcaster. He's a comedian. I'm not going to invoke his name because I don't know if he'd be happy if I did it. But I remember I gave him, you know who I'm talking about. I had a very long, discussion with him on his program, and I was giving him the history of how we got to 2014 and what happened since 2014. Up, I think at that time it was like the year 2020. Okay, and I was explaining the dynamics of the coup. And, he said, so Yanukovych, he's pro-Russian. I said, well, if he was pro-Russian, then why was he negotiating with the European Union for an association agreement? Okay. He was trying to get the best, which for a country like Ukraine, that normally you would try to get the best deal from both sides. Okay. If you're adroit and smart about it. Okay. And that's one of these myths that continue to be out of so many that we could talk about, is that the best possible position to be in is to be a broker. Okay. And Poroshenko walked away from that. Zelensky cowardly walked away from it. But no, I'm agreeing with both of you. The West has had its claws greedily around Ukraine for a very long time.
And I think your analogy of identity politics, it was identity politics and creating, and this happened almost immediately after the fall of the Berlin Wall, to try to create these differences where they didn't exist. I mean, obviously they did that very successfully in Yugoslavia. Hey, they all hate each other. They can't possibly live together, even though they managed to live together fairly successfully since World War II. Oh no, they had to go. And then of course, you had this in Belarus. You had some people like Soros cultivating, there's something called the Belarusian national identity. It's very, very different from Russians. The Belarusian language. We need to fund all this Belarusian language studies.
For our viewers, George, I think you remember we brought Dima Babic on, which Dima Babic, his wife is Belarusian, okay? And Dima goes to Belarus very, very often. I mean, for him, there's like everyone else here, it's not a border, okay? You just go to Belarus. And Dima, with his kind of wry sense of humor at times, it says, nope, there's no difference. Even the people there believe that there is no difference whatsoever, okay? I mean, Lukashenko will say there's a difference because that will legitimize his power as president. But other than that, nope.
They will say that the food and the drink are better in Belarus. They will say that, and that the women are more.
Take that on your authority.
Are more beautiful and make better wives.
All right, I'm going to have to get Dima on here, and we're going to have to hash this out. We're going to have to hash this out. Okay.
Right, Patrick. This was once again a really fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for getting up early, because it's very, very early where you are. So thank you so much.
No problem. No, it's okay.
Really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you again very soon. So remember, if you like the Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.